Okay, welcome. Today I wanted to offer some reflections about Alan Turing, the creator of the Enigma machine, and to ask the question, did Alan Turing have boarding school syndrome? And if he did, how did that impact him? Okay. So, I was watching Enigma last night, and I've watched it before, and kind of stuck in the back of my mind about the journey of how they created the machine that broke the Enigma code, and Alan Turing, his connection, and they share a bit in there about his time at boarding school. Now, obviously, it's a Hollywood movie, so how much of it is true, I don't know. I haven't read his biography. Maybe one day I will come across it, and it will, either confirm or deny. But as I was watching it, there was a few instances there, and I was like, oh yeah, that's really typical of an ex-boarder. And it also shares in the film about how at one point he is being bullied. And as I watched the film, and whether they portray it this way, they're portraying him almost like he's autistic, that he's got peas on and carrots on a plate and he's dividing them, and then some kid throws loads of peas and carrots on him. And then later on, they show this scene where these kids have pulled up these floorboards, and they put him into this hole, and then they nail the floorboards down. So they basically, and then put a table over the top of him, so he can't get out, and he's imprisoned underneath this space. And it's one of his friends who eventually gets him out. It doesn't say how long it is, but this idea of being imprisoned, being trapped, and yeah. So that just the bullying. So he was in Sherbourne in the 20s, I believe. And another of the instances in the film where you can kind of see this almost lack of emotional intelligence is he's taken into the headmaster's office, and the headmaster is basically telling him that his friend, who got him out of underneath the floorboards, who they were, best friends, they mathematicians. That's where he learned code breaking from this other friend. And the headmaster's telling him that he's died. And Alan is basically saying, no, he wasn't a friend, didn't like him. Because that was essentially what we did in these schools, is because of this avoidant attachment, this keeping people at intimacy, at arm's length, keeping people away from us. You could just see him doing that. And the headmaster says, oh, we have this stiff upper lip, so that's very good. So it's like that was what was being modeled by the teachers, by everybody else, is to dissociate. Essentially, for me, dissociation is stiff upper lip. Very similar. No emotion. I shared this a couple of weeks ago about resilience. We're talking about how we're teaching resilience, and I'm pointing out that actually I think it's more like dissociation. That's what's being taught in these modern day businesses. So, one of the other things from the film then is, once he's working at Bletchley Park, where they create this machine, he calls it Christopher, and it's like he really struggles to, he's very bright, but he has no emotional intelligence, literacy, so he struggles to relate to people. He seems to get on reasonably well with this lady, who's played by Keira Knightley, and they end up getting engaged to stop her from going back home, because he really needs her for the work. But some of the ways it's portrayed, it's like it's really cold and shut down. He says at one point, she says, I don't he's trying to break the relationship off because he's worried that she's going to get into trouble. So he's trying to push her away. And she says, it doesn't matter that you're, he turns around to her, says, I'm homosexual. He says, it doesn't matter that you're homosexual. And he just says something quite cold there that, never cared about you. You were just there to help me with my work. And they split up at this point. And for me, that's very common of ex-boarders. And this idea of we're just no good with emotions, and therefore not very good with relationships generally. We try to keep people away from us rather than drawing people in and connecting emotionally. It's like that split off. I think those are really the reflections from the film. I'm sure there's many others, but it just struck me because they portray some of his time at boarding school. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating to see that, and just how he is. And interestingly, he's played by Benedict Cumberpatch, who is an ex-boarder. He went to Harrow, similar age as myself. So it's that, really fascinating how we have these certain traits. We don't do emotions very well, stiff upper lip, don't do relationships, we're workaholic, often have anxiety. They didn't talk about any of his addictions, but often, another of the symptoms of boarding school syndrome is addictions. So, just thoughts, it's still on Netflix at the moment for another week or so. So, the invitation would be to look at it as almost a psychological musings of, did this man have boarding school syndrome? And just look at some of his experiences at boarding school and how he deals with emotions, just for us to understand ourselves. So I've got this Friday, got a podcast going live with Mpumelelo. I can't remember how to say his surname, but that's going to be about compassion fatigue, and also this idea of, what was it like growing up in an African Zimbabwe boarding school. It was then Southern Rhodesia. And also we've got a premiere screening on Friday, which is exciting. This is our second screening in West Yorkshire. We're almost sold out of tickets, so looking forward to that. So any questions, please do let me know.